Okay, thank you very much for being here. I always appreciate getting to travel because I feel like when I go to new regions, I just learn so much more. I'd like to start with a question. How many people here have ever gotten separated from your partner in the backcountry? I'm raising my hand. Unfortunately, it's pretty common, and sometimes it's just for a few minutes, and everything comes out okay. Other times, it goes on a lot longer, and it can get pretty scary because you don't know if they broke a piece of equipment or could they be caught in an avalanche. The idea for this talk started in the winter of 2016-17, and there were only 12 fatalities that year, and that meant there were a lot of patterns that actually stood out. And Mark Staples and I in the spring were kind of like, wow, this is kind of odd. 4 out of the 12 people died while they were solo in the backcountry. And so that made us want to dig deeper to see if this was a trend over multiple years. There were also a surprising number of people who died while they were going uphill. So that's something I'll cover at the end of my talk. So when we started looking at the data, the CAIC database that's kept on US fatalities, picking out solo travelers was pretty easy. This is a sad case in Utah. Steve Jones was riding lifts going into the backcountry outside of canyons, and he was last seen right up here at 4 o'clock on this hill. And his body wasn't discovered for 2 more days. And we're assuming he came down this little ridge and then dropped onto this slope here. And it's a pretty innocuous looking slope. Probably most snowmobilers, snowboarders, snowshoers would say, okay, this is a great place to go down. But he triggered a small avalanche. He was shallowly buried. And the problem was he didn't have a partner. And probably almost any partner could have saved him because it was such a small avalanche and shallow burial. Then that brought to mind a bunch of cases where somebody was out in the backcountry with a group, but at the time of the avalanche, they were by themselves. So this is 2013 Skyline area in central Utah, and a group of snowmobilers had ridden up, and they were all playing on small features. And all of a sudden, at 4 o'clock, they realized one of their partners was missing. So they worked their way back down canyon. They saw a fresh avalanche, and that's when they made the sad but proper assumption their partner had triggered it and he was buried. And they don't even know the timing of that. So that's when Mark and I kind of came up with the idea you can be alone in the backcountry or solo, but you can also be effectively alone. And we sort of defined that as you have a partner, but they can't perform a fast, efficient rescue. And we came up with 3 situations. Like the last one with the snowmobilers, your partner's out of sight. You don't even witness that avalanche. But also, especially for non-motorized users, your partner can be too far away to get to you rapidly. Or if your partner's also caught, they have to dig themselves out or they might be injured before they can help you. This is a super tragic accident that happened 2009, Galena Summit in Idaho, that illustrates the last 2. There were a group of skiers, and the first skier entered the slope here, skied all the way down without incident, and is actually off the screen. The second and third skiers were moving around over here, and they triggered a slide. It's hard to see, but the crown goes all the way across and continues on. So skier number 3 is totally buried. Where are their partners? Their closest partners partially buried and injured and can't help. And skier number 1 had to put their skins back on, race uphill, dig out partially skier 2, continue a beacon search, and found skier 3, but it was too late. It was at least 30 minutes till they were able to clear the airway. So these are how we broke down. This is the breakdown. It was 233 avalanche fatalities in that time period. 12% of the people were totally solo. They headed out in the backcountry by themselves. They were alone when they triggered the slide that killed them. The 6% that are other are special cases it might be like a group of roped up mountaineers up in Alaska, for example, in a crevasse, but they still, for whatever reason, when the person died, their partners couldn't help them effectively. But this is the huge number. 1 out of every 4 people who died in the backcountry in the US had partners, and for some reason, those partners weren't able to help them in a fast, timely manner. They weren't effective for some reason, and so having a partner wasn't that useful to those people that died. And when you lump it together like this, it really comes out as a big number. And so to me, what that says is that we need to rethink how we travel in the backcountry, both when we're alone and also rethink how we're traveling in the backcountry with our partners so we can be the most effective partner we can, or our partners can be in a position to help us if they need to. So when it comes to traveling alone, I'm not saying don't do it. I find being alone in the backcountry very rewarding. I do it for my own pleasure. I do it for work. But I've had to also rethink and take a step back, because when you're by yourself, there's really no room for error. And something you might do with a partner, like kick a cornice, might not be appropriate to do by yourself, because if you make a mistake and go with that cornice, even a small incident could turn into a fatality. This, to me, says it all. This is a Mike Cleland drawing, and it's out of Alan and Mike's Avalanche book. And it just basically says, even a small slope can be dangerous if you're alone. And something that would be, a scary incident with a partner could actually turn out to be fatal by yourself. So I think this really explains it all. When it comes to traveling with partners, it's gotten very the norm. Everyone has a beacon, shovel, and probe. More and more, there's focus. You can't just have the equipment. You have to be trained. Make sure your partners know what they're doing. To be effective, they're the standalone rescue classes now, which are really good. And then there's this, how do you be an effective partner? And at least for the last 40 years, this is the mantra I grew up with. Okay, you're at the top of the slope. Ski one at a time. Get out of the way at the bottom. Keep your partner in sight. And I think sometimes that's about as far as it goes in our education classes. But I feel like there are a lot of group travel techniques and group management techniques that more people should know about and be using. And instead, right now, they're just in the upper level Avalanche classes and in the guiding courses. This is a story with a great ending, because it was a group of people who knew how to travel together. It's the Big Cottonwood, Little Cottonwood Ridge line. A group of 3 people were up here, and the standard way to do it is you ski. This is quite a steep chute. You come out the apron, and you tuck into these big trees, so you're safe and out of the way, but you can watch your partner. This day, the first person came down and just tucked under this rock. The second person came and got the full shot, skied down and out. The third person triggered a slide. They were caught, they were raked through these trees and fully buried. This person here was in the right spot. They just turned their beacon to search. There actually was somebody going up an up track with skins on, and the 2 of them feel like they got to the pinpointing the person in 2 minutes, dug him out in 2 minutes, and he was completely blue because he didn't have an airway. And it was their feeling, if it had been a 6 or an 8 minute recovery, he might not have made it, but this person knew exactly what he was doing. He was in the right spot for his partner. And so when it comes to open chutes and slopes, that can be easier to manage. You could think about tucking someone in partway down. You can think about somebody ending up on a ridge line. So the first person does some ski cutting, but then they get to a safe spot in case something happens for the rest. It gets a lot harder with trees. It's much harder to manage your touring group, your snowmobiling group, or if you have clients, when you're in a bunch of trees and you're trying to stay in sight of each other. One real common guiding technique, it's called setting a boundary or a fence line. I've got a photo without trees so you can actually see this. But you have a discussion up here, and the first person sets the fence line. It's often the guide, but it can be someone in your party, and then you have an agreement that everybody else is going to stay to the left or the right. And so then if somebody disappears, you at least have reduced the area you have to search or wonder about if they don't show up. And then another idea is just never go long. If it's thick trees, you can't keep each other in sight, you got to go short. Little short shots, regroup. Little short shots, regroup. And if you get separated, much less terrain to be searching or worrying about avalanches. A good friend, Bill Anderson, guides in the Tetons. And these are some of his other techniques of being with clients. If his clients don't all have radios, he does a Marco Polo game. So he's in the trees and maybe he's set it up ahead of time and has lost some contact or he can't see visually his clients. He plays Marco Polo and he creates a sound map so he knows where they are and he can try to bring them back together. He actually has his clients keep their cell phones on, obviously in a safe spot, but then he can, again, try to contact them if he's lost track of them. And finally, he practices. He says he can get his pack off and his skins out and back on in a minute and a half. And that, not just the practice part, but it made me rethink, where do I keep my skins when I'm skiing down an avalanche terrain? How fast could I get to them? Are they in a good spot if I had to put them back on and go back uphill? And then one other thing I think could help is pre-trip planning. In Utah, we may go up high and ski all these open slopes, but the place we might get separated or have someone caught in an avalanche might be these little slopes at the end of the day when you're coming out to the parking lot. They're steep, they go into a creek bed, they're trees, you can lose sight of each other. And if you chat about that ahead of time on the drive up, on the skin track up, then you can have a plan at the end of the day of we can't all just blast down, hit the trail, and go to the car. We need to be checking in with each other at certain points just in case. We should have eyes on each other in these little terrain traps. When it comes to snowmobiles, huge advantage called speed. A snowmobiler can be in a safe place and get to the last seen point of an avalanche victim in seconds, and that's awesome. But the other problem is your partners can disappear in seconds, right? You don't look over your shoulder and they are gone. So some thoughts for that is, Mark says he's made a neck swivel just part of a habit. He's always looking for his partner. Think about BCA radios, helmet radios. There are range issues. There could be reliability issues, but still anything that helps you communicate and keep track of your partners. Think about starting the day in a zone. So you're going snowmobiling in the winters for a day. You could make an agreement that everyone's going to stay in one zone for a while, and then after a few hours, you'll go over here or over here. But not having people get totally spread out. Another idea is having a buddy system. So even if you're in a zone, if everybody's playing over here and you've got somebody high marking over here, they could, because of the trees and the little ridges, they could trigger a slide and get buried and nobody notices. So if you have some sort of buddy system with your motorized travel, there's always going to be eyes on you and have, 2 or 3 people in each place. So basically, in conclusion to this part, there were 233 avalanche fatalities. 130 of those people died with a partner who was in the best position to help. They still died, but at least their partner gave them the best chance they could. But that leaves 103 people who either didn't have a partner or didn't have a partner who could respond in a timely manner. And, would a partner have made a difference? In some cases, it really would have. There's some cases it wouldn't have. But for a lot of those people, we'll never know because they didn't have that partner or an effective partner. So I'm going to move on to uphill. I don't know how many of you saw this. This was a Snowbrains headline. Who looks at Snowbrains besides me? Yeah. 6 caught and 2 buried in an avalanche in Big Cottonwood Canyon, Utah. And I'm sure half the West was going, what do they do in Utah where they're getting 6 people caught at a time? It had a reasonably good ending. The buried people were only buried to their chests. There was 1 blown out knee, and that was it. But what were these people doing? They were going uphill. It was a storm day, and they were in Cardiac Bowl, and this is what, This is what cardiac bowl looks like. And this is known as the standard up track. And I've used it dozens of times, okay? But this is a day when it was snowing intensely, and then it really kicked in, and there was some high precip rates. So they had 6 people, and they quote-unquote spread out. But I can almost guarantee they were going to come to here, transition, and then they were going to ski down 1 at a time. Yet they were going up 6 at a time. So like I mentioned, that year, 2016-17, I noticed there were a fair number of people who died while they were going uphill in avalanches. So when I wanted to dig deeper, Christina Raspolini and Linda George helped me with this. And the first thing I had to do was kind of decide what I was going to include and exclude. And I excluded motorized, people like heli skiing or people going out of bounds at resorts that really don't have any uphill component to their day. I also excluded snowmobilers and snow bikers because when you look at the accident reports, they transition so fast, uphill, downhill. You really couldn't tell what direction they were going when they got caught. So what I was looking at were backcountry skiers, boarders, snowshoers, hikers, and even people who might have snowmobiled in, but then were doing laps somewhere in the backcountry. So it's a much smaller data set than that first study we looked at. So about 35%, or I think it's about 83 people came in as, tours with a big uphill component to their day. Again, there were unknowns. Those were due to cornice accidents where you really couldn't tell from the accident report what was going on, and also just accident reports that lacked details. So when I did this study, in the back of my mind, I was thinking, well, if we find out that 10 or 15% of people who are touring die while they're going uphill, that's kind of significant. When the numbers came out, it's 1 out of every 3. So again, it was like, wow, 1 out of every 3 of us that are touring and going uphill die and get caught and die in avalanches. It's while we're going uphill. And again, to me, that was a huge number, and it made me have to rethink, wow, I should relook at how I'm traveling when I'm going uphill. I just had a few thoughts on that. First, if you're non-motorized, you spend most of your time going uphill. So you want your safest track up possible. You obviously want to space out, but you have to think about it. That cardiac bowl accident, spacing out really didn't help, right? Because they were all in the path, still below each other. Reevaluate the terrain often. If you're going to cover 3 or 5,000 vertical in a day, the snowpack is going to change. You're moving from south-facing to north-facing. In their case, the weather was changing. It was much more intense snowfall than expected, and I don't think they reevaluated their plan for the day, when it started snowing 2 inches an hour or more, and it had already snowed 10 inches that day. So it's reevaluating. I think pre-trip planning can help. If you already can identify the avalanche terrain you're going to pass through going uphill, you can have a plan. So you don't have to stop and you're all sweaty and stripped down and go, okay, what are we going to do here? You've already talked about it and you know exactly how you're going to space out. And also for education, I don't know how many people here are educators, but if, for non-motorized classes, I think the students need to know this right from the beginning. We're not just looking at when we're having fun going downhill, we need to be thinking about where we are in the terrain going uphill. So, in conclusion, I love these Mike Cleland photos. This is confusing. It's very hard to learn all this in your life, whether it's 5 years or 20 years in the backcountry. It's very hard to implement this in the backcountry. How can you remember all this, especially if it's cold or snowy? And I think it's also incredibly hard to be trying to teach this to people. If you're an educator and you're trying to explain, what do I focus on, what's important or not? So I feel like good proactive travel procedures could use more emphasis both in our education and in practice. And regardless, if you've got a partner, you need to know where they are, and you need to be thinking about traveling with a little more intention, with your partners, and having, be thinking of the worst case scenario and how you might be able to prevent that, or if it happens, how you're going to be the best effective partner. And I'd like to finish with this. It's a Dick Dorwith quote from Troglodytes and Technology. And Dick just he's about 80 now, and he just talks about all the modern gear and theories there are now, but that he always circles back to the basics. Years ago, Bob Beatty gave him these 4 words: the basics never change. And Dick's comment is that has saved his life more times than not through the years in the backcountry. And I kind of feel like travel in the backcountry with your partners is one of those basics that we can go back to. And if we can't figure out what's going on with the weather, the snowpack, or anything else, circle back to those travel basics and go and figure out how to make it as safe as possible. I assume I might have time for questions? Okay. Does anyone have any questions, or? Yeah. Does he need a mic?
Back, so if you could just stand up so we can see you, see who you are, we'll hand the mics to you. It looks like we have a mic right here in the middle of the audience. Yeah. Can you stand up and give us a question?
Hello. Just curious the number, or if you know the percentage of solo to group trips, just to put a perspective on those numbers?
No, okay. Because are you, in the fatalities, you could probably pick that out, but at least in the Wasatch, we have no idea how many people are in the backcountry. You're just saying to look at the fatalities only? Yeah, and the answer is no. I mean, even with trail counters, we've never figured out how many people are in the backcountry. It's a huge black hole in the data. At least in Utah it is, and I think most places. And we had a question.
Down front here. Louis, do you want to stand up?
What is a sound map?
What is a what?
Sound map.
Sound map. So that would be we got separated in the trees, but we have a thing, or a decision, and I've got my clients ordered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so I go, okay, sound off, and I hear 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 shouts over here. And I can't see them, but in my mind now I have a sound map that, okay, 4 of my partners are over here, but somebody's way over there. I need to get 5 back in. So it's just after I hear my partners shout, I can visualize, are they over here, are they far away, are they close? Does that make sense?
We have a question back here in the corner.
Okay, we got one right here by the mic, I think.
Just quickly, were your 223 deaths over 9 years, were those nationwide?
Yeah, the 233 deaths are the 9-year period, every avalanche fatality in the U.S., including Alaska, but just the U.S.
And the gentleman in the flannel.
Yeah.
That helps a lot, right?
We've got a lot of those.
Yeah, thanks. Really, really great talk. I just want to make a comment for folks back here. It's really hard to see the laser pointer, so it might be good to describe what you're wanting people to look at.
Thanks.
All right, thank you for that feedback. We have somebody sitting over here with their hand up in the middle. If we could get him a mic.
Yeah, right here. I was curious about when folks are dying with a partner. Are in the statistics, are you figuring who has died because of a burial versus like an impact injury? In some cases, there's no way to help them.
Right, and we did not separate fatalities from trauma versus asphyxiation. But it was just looking at the position of the people, and we we sort of felt that still, even if someone died from trauma, but they were by themselves, they were alone, or they were with partners, but their partner didn't even know what had happened, we felt it still gave us an idea of how people are traveling with partners in the backcountry. But we did not break it up into asphyxiation. And part of that, too, is a lot of the accident reports, part of the reason we only went back like 8 years, is they get less and less detailed. And I know in Utah, sometimes we've had trouble even getting the coroner's report of whether it was asphyxiation or trauma. So I feel like that data is just not very accurate in the US database.
Cool. I think we have time for 2 more questions. Gentlemen, yeah.
Just talking with my friend about the added margin of safety with airbags. Do you have any data about that?
There is data somewhere on the airbags, but I don't know it off the top of my head. You know, I know in Utah we've had full burials with people with airbags, like, you know, they trigger a slide, they come out on top, and then there's a secondary slide that comes in and completely buries the person in the airbags. But I know there's really good data somewhere on that, and I think somebody else in this room would know where to look for that.
Yeah, Pascal Hagley, he's with Simon Fraser University, has done a lot of research on to better understand airbag and airbag efficacy.
That was a fantastic talk. Thank you very much. We've done some work a few years ago looking at snowmobilers versus skiers. And in that data, we saw that snowmobilers were up to 7 minutes out of sight from one another. And I was just reflecting on that with skiers where we have fewer data points. But generally speaking, when we're out in backcountry skiing, if you lose sight of your partner for 30, 40, 60 seconds, that feels like a long time. And we use GPS tracks to kind of look at that issue. So I think there's great opportunity with a lot of us carrying GPSs now to try and really nail down how and where we move to try and quantify that and improve things. So thanks for bringing that to our attention.
All right, and I think those concepts of a zone, you know, playing in a zone or having a little buddy system might help keep snowmobilers and bikers, you know, in visual contact. Okay.
All right. I think there's time for one more question. We have.
Okay, the article on this was in TAR 36.4, Lynn said. So that was last year. So the graphs are there, and you know, like a little article. And if people want the graphs for education and stuff, just email me, and I'll just send you those slides. You know, anybody can have that stuff. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you so much.